Today's content might be slightly more disturbing and morbid than my average piece of content, because there are times in sports history where we see some truly transcendent and phenomenal athletes, and unfortunately, those careers are taken away from us sooner than we would like to imagine. So what we're going to be doing today is we're going to be discussing 6 NFL players who died while they were still in the prime of their careers, meaning that each and every player on this list still clearly had unfinished business in the NFL before they died. Before we get to the content, guys, if you are new to the channel and you absolutely love the NFL and all football content, make sure you drop a like, subscribe, and turn on my notifications. Furthermore, I live stream on Twitch on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Sunday nights at 9 p.m. Pacific time. So our very first player that we're going to be discussing is a second-round pick in the 2005 NFL Draft by the Denver Broncos by the name of Darren Williams. Because he is a story that doesn't get talked about nearly as much as it should, and he is a player that has so much unfinished business on the football field that it is scary. Darren Williams was drafted in the second round of the 2005 NFL Draft by the Denver Broncos, where he would play alongside future Hall of Fame cornerback Champ Bailey. During the early parts of his career, Darren Williams and Champ Bailey looked to be the next great cornerback tandem in the NFL. Williams would start 14 games in 2006 while recording 4 interceptions and 9 passes defensed. But on New Year's 2007, Darren Williams' career and life would end while attending a New Year's and birthday party for fellow Denver athlete Kenyon Martin at a nightclub called Safari. Now bear in mind, this was a huge event that a lot of superstars went to. Carmelo Anthony was also said to be in attendance, and according to the police, there was an altercation between some of the people at the party and some Crips gang members. Apparently, one of the players who was in said altercation included Darren Williams' Broncos teammate Brandon Marshall. Marshall was said to have instigated the fight, and Williams apparently was not involved in the altercation at all. But Williams would unfortunately get killed in a drive-by shooting after a bullet hit him in the neck, killing him almost instantly. After he was shot, he fell in the lap of Broncos teammate Javon Walker, and that was the end of his career. It's sad to think of what the Broncos defense could have been if Darren Williams stayed, because he was already beginning to prove himself at the NFL level. But I don't think any death on this list could have been more important for humanity and for football than the death of Chris Henry. Chris Henry was a third-round pick in the 2005 NFL Draft by the Cincinnati Bengals. And for the most part, he had a pretty decent career. He wasn't a player that was consistently getting over 1,000 yards receiving, and he wasn't breaking any touchdown records. He didn't make it to a Pro Bowl, but he was a really good role player. He never really topped 600 yards receiving per year, but he was good at filling his role, which was catching passes that didn't go to Chad Ochocinco. The issue was how he behaved off of the gridiron. On December 15, 2005, Henry would get pulled over for speeding, and after a search, they would find marijuana in his shoes. He pleaded guilty and was able to avoid jail. Just 5 months later, on April 29, 2006, Chris Henry would allow 3 underage women to drink, and they were of the ages of 18, 16, and 15. Just 1 month later, he would get pulled over for suspected drunk driving, and that fall, the NFL would suspend Henry for violating the league's substance abuse policy. Henry would get suspended again by the NFL during the 2007 NFL season with a warning that any future misconduct would result in his career ending. He would get arrested on December 2007 for violating his probation, but was found not guilty, and on March 2008, he would punch a man by mistake because he thought that man owed him money. And I think out of all of his arrests, this one was the most telling, because it would result in Henry getting cut by the Bengals a first time before he would eventually come back. Chris Henry would ultimately die on December 19, 2009, when he fell out of the back of a moving truck driven by his fiancée while they were in a domestic dispute. And his autopsy revealed that Henry had developed CTE during his playing career due to repetitive hits to the head. The significance of Henry's death was that he was the first case where an active NFL player had died and could be diagnosed with CTE. so a lot of his erratic behavior could be attributed to CTE. Now, the next player that I want to discuss is a player that I was fairly unsure about including or not, and that is Derrick Thomas. And the reason I was unsure about whether to include Derrick Thomas on this list is because on one hand, he's a phenomenal NFL Pro Bowler and one of the greatest pass rushers of all time. But at the same time, he was no longer in his prime when he died. I figured better safe than sorry and decided to include a NFL Hall of Famer in this list. Derrick Thomas was the 4th overall pick in the 1989 NFL Draft by the Kansas City Chiefs. And in his second season in the NFL, he was able to sack the quarterback 20 times. To give you an idea, that's pretty much like Nick Bosa coming back and getting 20 sacks for the San Francisco 49ers this season. Derrick Thomas holds the record for most sacks in a NFL game, which is 7 sacks, and has come close to breaking his own record multiple times with 6 sacks in a game. In total, Derrick Thomas has 126 sacks in 10 years with the Kansas City Chiefs. And on January 23rd, 2000, Thomas's 1999 Chevrolet Suburban would go off of the Interstate 435 as he and 2 passengers were driving to Kansas City International Airport during a snowstorm for a flight to St. Louis to watch the NFC Championship game between the St. Louis Rams and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Police reports indicated that Thomas, who was driving, was speeding at approximately 70 miles per hour, even though snow and ice were rapidly accumulating on the highway. Thomas and one of the passengers were not wearing seatbelts and both were thrown from the car. The passenger was killed instantly. The second passenger, who was wearing his safety belt, walked away from the scene uninjured. Thomas was left paralyzed from the chest down. And by early February, Thomas was being treated at Miami's hospital. The morning of February 8, 2000, while he was being transferred from his hospital bed to a wheelchair on his way to therapy, Thomas told his mother he was not feeling well. His eyes would then roll back, and he would die due to a pulmonary embolism. Speaking of absolutely elite pass rushers, I couldn't make this video without mentioning a player that, if he was alive, he could have completely altered the course of NFL history. And that's Jerome Brown. For those of you who don't know who Jerome Brown is, he was one of the anchors of an elite Philadelphia Eagles defense that spanned from 1987 to 1991, which would be his final season in the NFL. Jerome Brown would join a Philadelphia Eagles defensive line that featured Reggie White and Seth Joyner, with a defensive head coach in Buddy Ryan and a young Wade Phillips as defensive coordinator. In 5 NFL seasons, Brown finished with 29.5 sacks in 76 games as the Eagles led the NFL in sacks during his 5 seasons and had a top 5 defense in points allowed in 1989 and 1991. Not to mention how dominant the 1991 defense was with Brown, which only had the potential to be even better in 1992. Brown was on the fast track towards becoming a Hall of Fame defensive tackle before a car accident resulted in his tragic death at the age of 27. Brown's death arguably played a role in Reggie White, Seth Joyner, and many others leaving the Philadelphia Eagles in free agency over the next few years. And I don't think any list like this could be completed if we didn't discuss Pat Tillman. Because Pat Tillman's story is one of the most fascinating stories I've ever read and should be its own video. And to give you an idea of who Pat Tillman was, he was your favorite underdog story. Standing at 5'11" and 202 pounds, he wasn't recruited very heavily coming out of high school, but he was able to secure the final scholarship on Arizona State University's football team. Despite being extremely undersized, Tillman was dominant and helped his team go undefeated and make it to the Rose Bowl. Tillman then entered the 1998 NFL Draft, where he would get drafted by the Arizona Cardinals in the 7th round. He would move over to safety and start 10 games in his rookie season, where he would have an insane 73 combined tackles, something that I personally would never expect from a 7th round pick that just converted to safety. Tillman would play for the Arizona Cardinals for 4 seasons, putting together 374 combined tackles and 15 passes defensed, 3 forced fumbles, and 3 interceptions. At the conclusion of the 2001 NFL season, Tillman had offers from the Arizona Cardinals and the St. Louis Rams. The Rams offered him a 5-year, $9 million contract, which he rejected out of loyalty to the Cardinals. And the Cardinals offered him a $3.6 million contract over 3 years. Now, this is where the story gets really fascinating. Tillman would turn down both contracts to enlist in the U.S. Army, which is extremely brave, which is incredibly brave and extremely bold considering the fact that he was a 7th round pick that was just making $500,000 a year. Tillman essentially turned down the contract he's been working for to protect our country. And this is where the story gets a little dark. Tillman and his brother enlisted in the Army in May of 2002 and completed basic training in September of 2002. He would get redeployed to Afghanistan, and on April 22, 2004, it was reported that he was killed by enemy combatants. Now, there's an entire controversy surrounding the cause of his death, because later on they found out that apparently he was killed by friendly fire. And there's a conspiracy that it was covered up by the military because there was so much spotlight on Tillman's decision to leave the NFL to enlist in the Army to begin with, that the military didn't want the public to know that America's most famous soldier got killed by friendly fire. Like I said, the story can get really deep and there isn't a lot of evidence to back what I'm saying up. So if you want me to do a deep dive into this scenario and the story, let me know in the comment section down below. And finally, I'd say that this next player is the reason that I made this video to begin with. So if you stuck around to this point, then comment rest in peace to any of the players that I mentioned on the list. This final player is Sean Taylor, and Sean Taylor's story might be the most tragic story of them all. And I remember it very well because it happened when I was in middle school. After dominating at the University of Miami for 3 years, Taylor decided to leave college 1 year early because he was shooting up draft boards. I'm sure we can all agree as NFL fans that out of all positions we see in the NFL, the position that produces the least absolute game changers might have to be the safety position. Like, if I sit down to actually think about it, if I want to think of some safeties that truly dominated the game over the past 10 years, off the top of my head, I could say Ed Reed, Earl Thomas, and maybe Cam Chancellor. Maybe I'm forgetting some players, so let me know in the comment section down below if I'm completely sleeping on the safety position, but I don't see a lot of game changers being drafted at that position. I actually see a lot of draft busts at the safety position. Like most recently, off the top of my head, I think of Mark Barron, who had to convert to a linebacker. I think of Malik Hooker, who just had his 5th-year option declined. I think of Jamal Adams, who's a phenomenal player, but he's on the trade block. I don't know. If you could prove me wrong, let me know in the comment section down below. Pretty much the point I'm trying to get to is when a player like Sean Taylor enters the NFL draft, any team will happily pounce on him regardless of need. So Sean Taylor would get drafted 5th overall in the 2004 NFL draft, directly after the New York Giants drafted Phillip Rivers. And as a Cowboys fan, let me tell you, this guy was an absolute freak of nature. In those days, a safety that could tackle well and lay a hard hit automatically would play the strong safety position, whereas a safety that excelled in coverage and could defend passes would play free safety. But I don't believe I've ever seen a safety that could play both positions the way Sean Taylor could, and his statistics speak for themselves. In his rookie season, Sean Taylor had 76 combined tackles, 1 sack, 2 forced fumbles, and 4 interceptions. So you might be thinking this may have been a fluke, but the very next season he came back with another 70 tackles, 2 forced fumbles, 1 fumble recovery, and 2 interceptions. The worst part of the story is the fact that you can clearly see through the most basic statistics that Sean Taylor was clearly on his way to greatness, because in his 3rd year, he had 111 tackles, 3 forced fumbles, and 1 interception. And in his 2007 NFL season, he had 5 interceptions in 9 games. Taylor would never finish the 2007 NFL season because on November 18, 2007, Sean Taylor would be robbed by burglars who pried open a window, then entered Taylor's home. Sean would then get shot in the upper leg, and typically you'd think that a gunshot through the leg wouldn't be fatal, but the unlucky part of the story is Sean would get shot directly where his femoral artery was. This would cause excessive blood loss, and Sean Taylor would die as a result of this 9 days later on November 27. All 4 of his robbers were arrested and charged with first-degree murder and burglary. Guys, I know there's a good chance I may have omitted a player that you absolutely love on this list, so if there's enough players that I completely forgot to mention in this video, let me know in the comment section down below and we can do a part 2 to this video. Also, I really hope I was able to do justice to all these phenomenal players, and most importantly, I hope you enjoyed the content. Aside from that, I'm your boy Mike, and I'll catch you guys in the next upload.